So Ben, the 25% tariffs that the Trump administration imposed on some European wines last year in connection with the Airbus trade dispute is coming up for review. Can you tell us about how those tariffs backfired on the U.S. industry?
Sure. So as you probably know, the issue that the USTR, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, is trying to solve is the question of illegal subsidies to Airbus. So what they want to know is, are these tariffs effective at influencing behavior change in the EU? And with respect to tariffs on imported wine from Europe, we think the answer is a hard no. And the question you asked sort of leads to that. Effectively, tariffs on wine do significantly more damage to U.S. businesses than they do to their targets in the EU. Because of the way prohibition was repealed, the 21st Amendment, the wine industry in the United States has a firm set of highly regulated laws that oversee the way alcohol is distributed. Because of that system, effectively, for every dollar of damage in tariffs on imported wine do to the EU, they do a little more than 4 times that damage to businesses here in the US. There's a good anecdote that I think explains the differences in the wine world than in other, for instance, consumer products. I'll start with an anecdote about, let's say, clothing products. So, you could walk into a Chanel store in Dallas. You can be walking into a French-owned retail store. The distribution can be French. The manufacturer can be French. You could walk into a Zara in Cleveland. The retail store can be an EU company. The distribution can be EU-owned. The manufacturer can be EU-owned. You cannot do that in the wine world. It does not exist in that mechanism in the United States. When you buy a bottle of wine here in the US, even if it's, a bottle of Dom Perignon, a famous French brand, there's no such thing as a Dom Perignon wine store. You're walking into a US-owned wine retailer, almost certainly a small business. There are more than 47,000 independently owned retail stores in the United States for wine, and almost all of them are small family-owned businesses. That US retailer is buying from a US distributor. There's no choice in that. This isn't a business model. These are regulations and laws on a state-by-state level. That US distributor is buying from a US importer. And only that US importer is buying from the French manufacturer. I'd also point out that because of this very highly regulated system of alcohol distribution here in the United States, it means that the wine business in general is overwhelmingly small business. There are 47,000 retail stores. There's about 6,500 US distributors and importers. We have, between, not counting restaurants, we have about 400,000 employees. But we don't have, 5 or 6 companies at 50,000 a clip. We have tens of thousands of small mom and pop businesses. Really, they represent the idea of, American entrepreneurialism, people that had a passion for something and wanted to find a way to make a living at it. And so it makes the wine business particularly at risk from tariffs, both because the economic damage is pushed more heavily on our businesses here at home than the targets abroad, and because those businesses themselves are mostly small business. It also, by the way, makes tariffs on wine an incredibly ineffective way at influencing the EU to change their behavior. The EU is full of very smart people. They also have a very firm understanding of the way the wine business works in the US. Agriculture is a part of what they do. They know the way their products are distributed overseas, especially in an important market like the US. The EU also knows that the US must target something for tariffs, because this is a part of a WTO award. So if you were the EU and you knew the US had to tariff a product, would you want them to tariff products that made sure most of the damage stayed in the EU? Or would you quietly hope that they were putting a bunch of tariffs on things that were going to backfire and hit a lot of American businesses? I think it's a pretty easy answer to that question.
So, in addition to being the president of the U.S. Wine Trade Alliance, you're also a managing partner to Tribeca Wine Merchants. So, last year when these tariffs started getting imposed, how did you feel that at the wine merchants?
Well, in November and December, we didn't feel it too much, simply because most of the distributors had brought their products in prior to the tariffs being implemented. But you start seeing a real issue with it, starting in January and February, when distributors started essentially refilling their stocks from the fourth quarter push. And it's tremendously problematic. Prices on key items are significantly higher. It's resulted in fewer sales of those products. And there is no question of people that, for instance, that are passionate about white Burgundy going to, buying more California Chardonnay. That's just not the way it works. That's not the way we see things. So there's no doubt that we felt this impact. And then obviously, the coronavirus crisis has just inflamed this issue for the broader wine trade. You've seen U.S. distributors and importers have their sales collapse by up to 50 or 60%, as a huge part of their customer base, restaurants, were closed by mandate in most large cities in the United States. So now you've got this really horrendous crisis in the wine world, where at the same time you have the largest collapse in sales in my lifetime, coinciding with this burden put around our necks by our own government in the form of a terrible 25% tariff. The timing couldn't be worse, and it's unfortunate. I mean, at this point, the tariffs, they risk doing tremendous harm to mainly the U.S. wine industry, and it's hard to overstate the downside risk here with these two coinciding at the same time.
These tariffs are coming up for review by the U.S. Trade Representative. What can we do to influence them?
That's a great question. So right now, between June 26th and July 26th, the USTR has opened their comment portal on the WTO tariffs, the current tariffs that are in place right now. Consumers and businesses should write to the USTR and ask that they carousel off of wine tariffs and put the tariffs onto something that is less damaging to U.S. small business and more likely to influence the EU to change their behavior with respect to Airbus. I would point out here that the current tariffs on Airbus itself, the recipient of these illegal subsidies, is somehow only 15%, while the tariffs on unrelated products are 25%. That seems strange. Even, I believe, Boeing, who was damaged by these illegal subsidies, has made clear that Airbus should be the recipient of the majority of the tariffs. It would be significantly more helpful to Boeing itself, and it would be more likely to pressure the EU to change their behavior. People can also write their representatives in Congress. That's a very effective way at getting your message across. And there's becoming a sort of a broad swath in Congress who's understanding how problematic these tariffs are. And they really like to hear from their constituents about this. We've seen we've seen great results from people contacting their members. And here again, you can ask your representatives to contact the USTR with the same message to carousel off of these tariffs. But you can also ask your representatives to provide some sort of tariff relief through congressional action as a part of the upcoming phase 4 COVID relief bills. They have it within their capacity to, for instance, offer tax rebates to U.S. companies who are having to pay these tariffs, which would be an incredible, which would do incredible good by injecting much needed cash into a whole series of American businesses that are just reeling due to this sort of double whammy of a tariff burden alongside with the collapse of their customer base due to the COVID-19 situation. No, the only other thing that I would say is if you go to uswinetradealliance.org, you'll be able to find instructions on the best arguments to make, as well as instructions on how you can actually go and comment on the WTO issue for USTR.
Excellent. Thank you for your work on this, Ben. Thank you for talking to me, and good luck on the comments here.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it.